What's up, aspiring grinders and loyal listeners? Welcome back to the Carrot Poker Podcast channel. I just had to do a retake there because I totally messed up my words twice when I was making the intro. Kind of strange. That doesn't normally happen to me after making 200 training videos and stuff like that. But hey, I guess it can happen to all of us. So third time lucky. Today I'm making a podcast on my own. Boo-hoo, don't have any student with me. And it won't always be the case that I'm interviewing students on this show. It will be for the most part. This is going to be a very, very student-orientated channel, as I've said in all of the subsequent episodes up until now. But there will come times when I want to just share my wisdom with you guys on my own and just sort of give you a little lecture on a key strategic or mental game poker principle. And today's principle is GTO. What is this GTO? Is the name of this episode. And from the name, you should be able to infer that this is not going to be a really, really deep advanced course in game theory optimal poker. It's going to be a very much a light introduction to GTO, what GTO means literally, like game theory optimal, what that means literally, and then what it actually means for us as humans applying it in our normal games. How does it affect the ranges we play, the decisions we make? And what we're going to discover is that balance is basically the essential ingredient to GTO poker. And we're going to talk about when it's good to try and emulate this very balanced game theory optimal play, and when it's better to not do that at all and move away in an exploitative direction to make adjustments against mistakes your opponents are making, and instead try to exploit them rather than playing a super, super solid game yourself that can't be exploited. So it's good to know what it is, literally what it means in practice, and then why we do it, when we do it, and when we shouldn't do it. That's going to be the focus of this podcast. By the end of it, I would like you guys, basically, my aim is that you guys have an idea. You're no longer as confused by GTO, because it can be confusing. It's a term that gets misapplied, thrown around. A lot of my students come to me sort of saying, I want to get better at GTO, and they don't even know what it is or when to apply it, and they're just kind of deluded, and that's very common because it's a complicated notion, and not that many people, I feel, teach it very well to their students. They might teach it, so overemphasize certain things, overapply certain things, and I've had students come to me and their game has been ruined by trying to emulate GTO poker and not really truly understanding the limits of balance and when you need to actually stray away from having this perfectly harmoniously balanced game. So that's what I'm going to look at today. Hopefully by the end of it, you guys will no longer be over-applying it or under-applying it. You'll just know when to use it, have a basic idea of how to go about forming kind of balanced strategies and sort of GTO principled ranges, and when it's better to just stay with the intuitive, exploitative kind of idea to take advantage of weaker opponents. That's my goal. So let's get into it. What does it mean, GTO? I said that in a kind of Italian way where I used to teach English in Italy and my students would say, what does it mean, friend? I would have to explain the word friend to them. That's kind of like a bad habit I've picked up. It's funny that how teaching English can make you actually worse at English. So you pick up all the habits of your students. Fortunately, it doesn't happen in poker. So what is GTO? What means this GTO? What it means is game theory optimal. That's literally what it stands for. And if we are going to take an example game, just to, clarify this a little bit more easily, rock, paper, scissors is a very simple game in which you can make a GTO strategy, a game theory optimal strategy for it very, very easily. And that strategy would be playing an equal amount of rock, paper, and scissors. Now, let me define what a GTO strategy actually is, literally, before I elaborate on that analogy further. There's this thing in poker, in games in general, in anything where there are decision points and strategies involved called Nash equilibrium. And I think it was named after some guy called Nash that coined this kind of principle, this concept, although it's something that does exist inherently, naturally, in any game of strategy. And Nash equilibrium is a point reached in which all the participants can't actually make an adjustment to their strategy without playing in an inferior way in the long run than they were playing. So if we've reached Nash equilibrium and we're playing heads up and no limit hold'em, say, we're only at Nash equilibrium when neither of us can change our game without actually playing in a way that is less sound and lower EV in the long run. So the idea with GTO in a poker setting is that, literally speaking, we would have to be playing GTO, we'd have to reach this Nash equilibrium, this situation where we are playing perfectly against an opponent who's playing perfectly, and if anyone made a deviation from that perfection, it would obviously be an inferior strategy thus opening the sort of wormhole to exploitation. If I'm playing an X-way and you're also playing an X-way, then I just start adding a new thing to my game that wasn't part of that X strategy. You will have a Y counter adjustment available to you that will profit from my adjustment, basically. So literally speaking, GTO is playing in a perfect way against someone else who's playing in a perfect way, such that neither player can change the way that they're playing. So that's the Nash equilibrium. The GTO is the strategy that actually comprises the Nash equilibrium. Now, why would we want to do this in poker? Poker is a very human realm. We're dealing with a situation where people always make mistakes, people don't understand the game very fully. It's an extremely complicated game, and that's great for us, because what it means is that no one is actually playing GTO. No one knows what GTO is, because the game is so incredibly complex. There are 1,326 combinations of pre-flop starting hands, and then there are a myriad of different actions that can happen, with 6 of those combinations being randomly dealt out in a 6-handed table. And that's just pre-flop, and then there's like 3 bets, 4 bets, flats, there's post-flop, 3 more cards come down, more choices are made. The amount of actual situations that can occur in poker are probably more than like the amount of possible chess positions on the chessboard, or the amount of atoms in the galaxy, or grains of sand on the earth, or that would be less than atoms in the galaxy. But you get the point. All these analogies you hear people use to show how vast something is. I was at a wedding actually in Italy last week, and a girl said to me, it was a kind of awkward ice-breaking phase where people were like, so what do you do? What do you do? Oh, well, I'm a data analyst. Yeah, well, I'm a marketing, blah, blah, blah. I'm a lawyer. It comes to me, and every time I'm like, oh, man, here we go. I'm a professional poker player and coach, and I'm writing a poker book. That's like what I've simplified my life to right now, because those are the 3 things I'm doing: coaching, playing, and writing. And I was like, wow, okay, so, but surely, and they come up with some random question at this point. You guys are probably sick of this as well from your non-poker playing friends, but something like, but surely it's all just luck, or something like that. And I wrote an article on this, like 10 bullet points for non-poker players. This is what we do, on my website, carrotcorner.com. Check that out. It might help you guys explain the situation, handle these questions. But anyway, her question was, but surely you've only got like a couple of choices. Surely you've just got like, you either bet or you don't bet, or something like that. And it was one of the more sensible questions I've ever heard, actually, from a non-poker player, because how are these people expected to know what we do, right? The sheer depth and complexity of it. Anyway, this is kind of long-winded, so to cut a long story short, I kind of replied defiantly with, well, that's what she said. She said, well, surely there's a finite amount of choices. And I said, well, there's a finite amount of atoms on the earth. And she kind of like looked taken aback at this, and she was like, well, yeah, but there's way more atoms on the earth than there are poker situations. And I was like, no, there aren't. So yeah, I don't know about that for sure. I mean, you'd have to work out all the possible combinations and bet sizes and patterns that could occur in poker to actually decide if that's true or not. But the point is, you cannot solve poker. You cannot find the absolute GTO way to play every single combination in every single situation, because there are too many situations, too many sub-factors, factors within factors. It's not possible. But what you can do is become very good at devising strategies for types of situations and playing in a way that is quote-unquote what we call GTO when we talk about poker. Now, when we say I'm playing GTO here, I'm playing in a GTO style, we don't mean I have solved poker and I'm playing the resulting Nash equilibrium strategy, or my half of it. That's not what we mean at all. What we mean is I'm playing in a way where I am, above all, the key word here is balanced. My game is not got holes in it. It doesn't have this wormhole of exploitivity where my opponent can make an adjustment such that he's then profiting from my play. I've eliminated that as much as I think I can, while also playing in the highest EV way that I can, meeting that goal of being balanced and not offering counter adjustments. So that might sound kind of complicated. My idea here was to simplify. This podcast will get simpler as it goes on, believe it or not. So what it means for us is balance above all. That's our idea. Let's go back to our rock, paper, scissors example now. So I've solved this game. It's a very simple game with only 3 decisions and only 1 decision point. So it's about infinite times simpler than poker, and infinite times less fun as a result. Bit tedious game, actually. So what is GTO and rock, paper, scissors? Well, I'm going to play equal amounts of rock, paper, and scissors. I'm going to do each of them exactly 1/3 of the time. And therefore, if you play more rock and I don't know that that's happening, you're not going to do anything against me because I'm still playing exactly the same amount. I'm only playing paper a third of the time. If you play more scissors, that's not going to do anything against me either because I'm only playing rock a third of the time. Or you get the picture. Rock beats scissors, but yeah. So this is the idea. I found Nash Equilibrium in rock, paper, scissors. I've got GTO down. I'm playing it. Very good. Now, let's think about this in a kind of poker context. Now imagine you weren't balanced in rock, paper, scissors. Imagine that my strategy was to always play rock. I just played rock every single time. This is like one of the three most unbalanced strategies you can get, just playing one of the three options all the time. You would sit down and you could play in a balanced way. Or instead, you could say, wait a minute, I'm just going to play paper all the time and I'm going to take literally all of your money, assuming we're rock, paper, scissoring for money. And that's not good for me. So in this situation, for me to take this strategy is really bad. And there's a common analogy in poker: take a fish who never folds. You know he can't find a fold at all when he's got like top pair, so he's going to call 100% of his top pairs in the river. It's like playing rock all the time. You just know that you're never going to bluff when you think his range is top pair heavy, and you're always going to value bet. You're effectively playing paper all the time against him by doing that. You're choosing an exploitative strategy that kills his strategy. So, yeah, that would be an example of an unbalanced strategy exploiting the fish, playing paper all the time to beat rock, and a balanced strategy trying to make sure there are no holes in your game, which is akin to playing rock, paper, and scissors in equally proportioned, exactly a third of a time for each of them. Now, poker's more complicated than that, because in rock, paper, scissors, you only have three things. There aren't sub-things that comprise your scissors. You don't need to build your scissors out of like loads of ingredients. You just make your hand in the scissors shape and that's it, you've played it. However, in poker, we're not balancing the shape, the frequency with which we make a certain shape with our hand. What we're balancing is our range. And we're trying to make sure that it's filled with certain amounts of combinations of one type of hand and then certain amounts of combinations of other types of hand so that we create harmony, we create balance. How do we do that? We use combinations. Let me take a simple kind of spot. Let's say I raise pre-flop and you call. It's irrelevant where from, stack sizes, it doesn't matter. I bet 3 times. I bet the flop, you call. I bet the turn, you call, and I bet the river. You're facing my river bet. Now this is where you might want to have a balanced strategy as to how often you call my river bet. You might not know how much I'm bluffing, how much I'm value betting, but you might want to be balanced here. So how would you do that? Well, you'd look at your range. And it's not enough just to call a third of the time, because that doesn't actually lead you. Let's say I make a pot-sized okay, I'm just picking numbers out there here. Let's pick a bet size first. Let's say that I bet pot. So if I bet pot, you need to be good 1/3 of the time to continue to my bet, to call my bet. And when I bet pot, I need 50% fold equity for that, if that's a bluff, for that bluff to break even. So those are two magic numbers, and you need to know this. You need to know required equity and required fold equity. So you need to know risk reward when people are bluffing, these milestone numbers. Pot size bet needs to work half the time with no equity. Half pot size bet needs to work a third of the time with no equity, etc. You need to know the milestones of how often you need to be good to call a bet. Pot size bet, you need 33% equity to call. Half pot bet, you need 25 to call. These numbers need to become automatic. You can find them on the internet. They're definitely included in the book that I'm writing because everyone just needs to know them straight away. They should be should come to you straight away. Anyway, so our opponent knows that for us to bluff profitably, he needs to be folding more than half the time. For us to be, therefore, to make us indifferent as to whether or not we actually bluff here, he would need to call exactly half of the time. That way, we're not making extra money by bluffing more than would be balanced, by adding bluffs to our range because they're just breaking even. And we're not making money by subtracting bluffs from our range either because we're just not doing something that breaks even. So our opponent would call 50% of the time exactly in this spot to make us indifferent to bluffing. So how does he do that? It's not just enough for him to play rock 50% and paper 50% because he needs to actually figure out the best way to call 50% of the time with his range. So he needs to call the 50% of his range that is the most suitable to call. And that doesn't mean the strongest because, let me give you an example. Let's say that the board is like, this is off the top of my head, so bear with me. Let's say the board is something like, I don't know, King 10-6 on the flop with a flush draw, brick 2 comes on the turn, but then a flush card 3 comes in the river. So we've got a board of king 10, 6, 3, 2, where the flush draw from the flop has completed on the river. Now, our opponent could call here. What's a better hand for our opponent to call with? King Queen without a heart, flush card in his hand, or King Jack with the flush card in his hand? Definitely King Jack with the flush blocker, because though the hand is slightly weaker, it's probably just as much showdown value against our pot-sized bet, polarizing our range. We either have the nuts or a very strong hand here, or a very weak hand here most of the time, or we have a very strong hand or air, I should say. So having that flush blocker, even though the kicker is slightly lower with King Jack, is going to be a more suitable hand for our opponent to call with than the King Queen without the blocker. So what's going on here is that our opponent needs to find this frequency, needs to fill up this 50% calling frequency with the most suitable 50% of his range that he gets the river with to call. So he needs to then choose, I'm going to call these hands, fold these hands in game. This sounds completely impossible. And we have to approximate it in game. We have to work on this stuff off the tables, approximate it in game to try and reach our desired frequency, our GTO orientated goal, if you like. So that's how it works in poker. It's much more complicated because we can't just go bam, scissors half the time. We need to actually say, how am I comprising those scissors? How am I comprising that calling range, or that raising range, or that polarized 3-bet bluff range pre-flop, or whatever it happens to be. So that's how we do it. GTO in poker is all about creating a balanced strategy from which any deviation would be exploitative. So if we deviated from the balanced strategy, we'd be doing one thing too much. And also against which our opponent can't just do something to auto-profit against us. He can't make an adjustment that's higher EV than playing a balanced strategy himself. So if for example, on that river, you're the hero trying to work out what chunk of your range you should call to make your opponent indifferent to bluffing, it doesn't really matter if he starts bluffing more or less. We don't know what he's doing, so he can bluff more. It doesn't matter. We're still making those bluffs 0 EV. That's the key, by calling X frequency of our range. Okay, that was kind of complicated. I guess by intro to GTO, I mean introducing it and then rambling very, hopefully coherently, but at a fast pace about GTO. That's the beauty of a podcast, though. You can listen to it multiple times. So I've covered what it literally means. I've covered what it means in a poker context, that we can actually apply it. So now I want to talk a bit about how we actually do that. So I alluded before to the fact that it's not just as simple as choosing the strongest hands for the calling range. You always want to be thinking in terms of what is the most suitable hand for the job. I'll give you another analogy at this point, and it comes from Plato. I did a philosophy degree, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Plato's Republic, but it's basically a book that he wrote way back in whatever year. I'm not a historian, don't quote me on it, but sometime a long time ago. And Plato basically said that the ideal society is this, and he said it's one in which everyone has the job that is right for them. That's what justice is. The ideal society is just, and the guy that loves making shoes makes shoes, and the guy that loves killing people is a soldier in the army, and the really intelligent people at the top of the pile that like making the decisions are the philosopher kings, and they make all the decisions for everyone. A balanced utopian range is much like Plato's idea of the balanced utopian society. Every hand in the range does the right job for it, and it fills the right chunk of the range that it's suited to, just as the cobbler makes the shoes and the blacksmith makes the swords in Plato's society. So let me give you an example of like pre-flop. Let's say we want to make sure we're defending X percentage of the time to our opponent's 3-bet, because that's the kind of percentage that would make him indifferent to 3-betting any 2 cards as a bluff, which is our goal when we're trying to play GTO balanced poker. Now, how do we go about doing that? Well, I can say, right, clearly pocket aces is going to be a 4-bet for value. That hand is strong enough to 4-bet for value, and I want to balance my 4-bet value range with my 4-bet bluff range, so the right job for pocket aces is 4-betting it for value. Then I could say, Queen Jack suited is a nice hand. Should I 4-bet that as a bluff to balance with aces? No, I shouldn't. And the reason for that is that Queen Jack suited can call. Therefore, why would you send it into the bluffing range? It's a fine call. Why not bluff with a hand you can't call with? That makes much more sense, the right hand for the right job. So then I go down and I look at, I don't know, let's take King 10 off. Say I can't quite call that hand for whatever reason. It depends on the spot. Don't take these ranges literally for every situation. It obviously depends on all the factors in play. But just to give you guys a general overview, King 10 off might be a 4-bet bluff because while it's slightly out with our calling range, it has the best blockers of the hands we might fold otherwise. It has a king blocker, stops our opponent having kings or ace-king so often, hands that he's certainly 3-betting and getting it in with for value. We want to reduce those combinations. It also has a 10, which blocks pocket 10s, and it's towards the top of our folding range. If our opponent flats off 4-bet, at least we have 2 cards that aren't terrible. So maybe the right job for King 10 off there is a 4-bet bluff to balance with the pocket aces, pocket kings, queens, ace-king, etc., whatever, that we're 4-betting for value. So it's like in Plato's Republic, you might have an old woman who's insanely good at knitting warm winter wear to keep people warm in their houses when it gets cold. And, what would you do with her? Well, she's a bit like the King 10 off. She's not good enough to call with. You can't send her out into the battle and expect her to stab people to death with the knitting needles. That's the bad use of that old lady's skills. Just as you can't take the King 10 off and 4-bet it for value or call with it. It's not suited to those things. But she is too good to just get rid of completely. If we had to, kill people in our society or whatever, I don't know, this analogy is getting out of control, we wouldn't want to kill her because she has a useful purpose. She's not good enough to send out into battle, but she's good enough to sit and create scarves, and that kind of implies that fighting is better than making scarves, but you guys can make up your own mind about that one. You get the point. The right person for the right role creates the ultimate happiness, the ultimate kind of balance of good over bad. Just the same as when we're trying to build harmonious balanced ranges and emulate a GTO style in poker. We want to pick the right hand for the right role. We have a target frequency. You need to send 10,000 troops to battle. Who are you going to send? You need to defend X amount of your opening range to the 3-bet. Which hands are you going to send and how are you going to deploy them? Which front line are you going to send them to? You wouldn't send cannons to the very front line where they're just going to get destroyed. They'd stay at the back and fire bombs over everything else, right? I assume, not really a military strategist, but yeah. So that's GTO poker in its essence. That's what we mean when we talk about GTO. We're thinking about how to create this kind of strategy against which our opponent is indifferent to how he plays. So that's the what. Now we come to the why. Why would we do that? Why would we play in a GTO way? I can think of an objection to it. Imagine that my opponent is just always folding the river. Why would I only want X amount of bluffs there? Surely I'd want to bluff everything. Well, yeah, I probably would. Assuming that he's not going to pick up on that and then start killing us by changing his strategy. It gets complicated. But probably against a guy at the net who folds the river all the time, I want to bluff way more than would be GTO. A sip of tea because I've been ranting a lot there. My tea's getting cold, which is not ideal. Not plus EV. So, where was I? Yeah. So, the objection there would be, you need to overbluff against the net that's folding. It's not a good idea just to play in a balanced way. Surely you're not getting the maximum amount of EV there, and that's very true. Because what the net's doing is he's playing very, very far away from balance. Because he's so unbalanced, he's created this hole into which we can sort of dive with our bluffs and just say, hey, we're going to exploit you by moving away from balance ourselves. So the less unbalanced your opponent is, the more unbalanced you should be to take advantage of that most of the time. And we're going to come to the caveat, the kind of exception to that in a minute. So we are going to basically play GTO, play in a balanced way, because we don't have a way of actually exploiting. We don't have a better alternative. The only reason we're not doing it against the net is because we have a better alternative. If I'm playing against you and I don't know anything about you, I don't know how often you're calling the river, I probably do want to balance my range somewhat. I probably do want to have an amount of bluffs that makes you indifferent to calling. So that's one reason. When there just isn't a better alternative available, we probably want to be GTO. Here's another reason. We want to be playing in a balanced way so that we don't give our opponent a clear route to exploiting us back, basically. We don't want to give him a route to leaving his own balance strategy that is highly plus EV, so it's like the other side of the coin. When might that be the case? Well, imagine that I'm pre-flop and I get dealt 7-4 offsuit, and I think you fold a lot to 3-bet, so I'm just going to 3-bet my 7-4 offsuit. What I'm doing there, in one hand, is I'm making a plus EV play in a vacuum, and I'm probably winning money over that one hand. Expand it, zoom out, think about this over 400 hands. What am I doing over 400 hands there? Well, I'm 3-betting one of the worst hands possible. which in the future will reduce my fold equity because my opponent is aware that I'm 3-betting. He can see this. He's not just a computer that's folding every single time he gets 3-bet. It's not like a brain-dead robot. So what I'm doing is I'm 3-betting like 100% of hands, or close to it, if I'm 3-betting a hand as bad as 7-4 offsuit. And what that's doing is it's offering our opponent a very, very clear route and a very obvious, profitable route for moving away from a balanced game of his own or whatever game he's playing and exploiting us badly. So when this net sees that we're 3-betting 80% of hands, at some point in the future, he's going to start defending loads, tightening his opening range, 4-bet bluffing us. Even like the worst players can successfully adjust to a strategy as unbalanced as 3-betting 80% of hands. If he can't, then he should probably take up a different profession. So we need to be very careful. We want to play GTO in order to prevent our opponent from adopting a counter strategy that is going to crush us way more than our strategy would start off crushing him by. That's definitely true. We do not want to 3-bet 7-6 off because it equates to 3-betting far too much and giving our opponent a clear route to bludgeoning us to death by just not folding to our 3-bets anymore. By 3-betting a bad hand in one instance, we actually lose EV in the future, although we may gain EV over that one hand in a vacuum. And this is what people mean when they talk about long-term EV against vacuum EV. And the other reason is that we may just not have a better strategy available because we don't know how our opponent is playing. So sometimes we play GTO because we don't know of a better way to play. We don't see an imbalance in his game that can obviously be exploited and should be exploited. And sometimes we might see an imbalance, but we still need to play somewhere on the GTO spectrum. We don't want to delve into the crazy realms of just being completely bonkers and 3-betting everything, for example, because it offers this clear route of re-exploitation to us. Let me give you the rock, paper, scissors equivalent to make this clear, just in case it's not. So let's imagine that I'm playing against a rock, paper, scissors fish. And this fish, for whatever reason, plays rock half the time. Okay? So the GTO strategy would be to play rock a third of the time, but this fish really likes rock. It's like his favourite thing. It's a big blunt object and it seems like the best weapon. So he deploys the rock half of the time and neglects the other two, using paper and scissors only 25% of the time, respectively. So what do we do against this? Well, in a vacuum, we play paper, right? We just play paper 100%. That's what we do. That's the best way to exploit this player, is to always play paper, nothing else. Problem. This fish is a human being. He might be bad at rock, paper, scissors. He might be using a bad strategy, but as soon as he sees that we do nothing but paper, he's going to, guess what? Do nothing but scissors. Or do scissors more at least and start killing us. So how do we exploit the fact that this player is not balanced? How do we exploit the fact that he's not playing in a GTO way? So we want to be unbalanced, but we don't want to be so unbalanced that we ruin the exploitative edge here, that we ruin our long-term EV by giving him an even better readjustment against us. So to what extent should we exploit him? To what extent should we add more paper to our range of plays, if you like? Well, we should add it up to the inflection point where we think we maximally exploit him, but he doesn't notice and start to change in a way that's bad for us. So maybe instead of playing paper all the time, we play paper 40% of the time and play the other two 30% of the time each. That way we're still playing more paper, but he's not going to realise because there's not a big enough sample for it to become totally obvious, and he's not tracking things so accurately to distinguish 33% from 40%. So we are playing more paper, but he doesn't know that. Alright, so, and in the poker setting, what we'd be doing there, the guy's leak as he folds too much to 3-bet, so we want to be unbalanced to a point to exploit that, but we don't want to 3-bet 7-deuce off because then we're playing paper every single time. What we want to do is pick the right hands for the right jobs as per Plato's Republic, like I was just rambling about, and we want to choose the best hands for our 3-bet bluffs. These will typically be hands that we can't call with, because again, why waste a calling hand in a 3-bet bluff? There'll be hands that we're not 3-betting for value, because we're bluffing them, and there'll be hands that are good enough that they have some playability, they're towards the top of our folding range. We could even 3-bet this guy with a 2-to-1 ratio of bluffs to value. That's to say we're playing paper like twice as often as we're playing anything else, and that might be good, but if we start doing it maybe 4-to-1, then it's going to be very obvious and he's going to stop folding and start playing back and exploiting us, and we're not going to know at which point that's happening when he started doing it. And so suddenly we go from being the hunters to the hunted, the exploiters to the exploited. and that's not what we want. So even when we're not balanced, even when we're not playing in a completely down the line GTO straight way, we're still going to have a semblance of balance to our game for the most part. However, there'll be some situations where we just have no balance whatsoever and we just don't care about it. So when do we not care? Well, firstly, let's summarize. When do we care about being GTO? We care about being balanced in common spots where a villain would both find out about our imbalances and also have opportunities to exploit them. The more common the spot is, the more opportunities the villain is going to have to readjust and exploit an adjustment we're making. Like 3-betting pre-flop is very common, it happens all the time. C-betting on the flop is very common. Even firing 3 streets as a pre-flop raiser is quite common. However, if we were like deep and some crazy thing happened in a multi-way pot in the hand that you're never going to see again, it's not quite so important to be balanced there. Well, it's nowhere near as important to be balanced there, because not only is your opponent not going to have enough of a sample to gather the information as to how you're unbalanced, he's also not going to have the recurring chances in the future to even exploit those imbalances. So the more common a spot is, the more mandatory it becomes to have a semblance of balance in your game and to be aware of the repercussions of making a big exploitative extreme adjustment. We'd also want to be balanced when we have no exploitable strategy available to us that we think is better. Like, we're just playing against a reg, we think he probably plays rock, paper, scissors in equal proportions, so therefore why would we want to start just randomly playing 80% rock? We wouldn't. We'll get ourselves killed. We're not doing anything there. His strategy is defensive. We're not gaining anything by doing that. We're just opening up a hole for him to step into and start playing paper on us all the time. It's just bad. So therefore we'd rather start out by being balanced ourselves and then see if we can pick up some info that maybe he plays rock 58% of the time, then we can exploit that. Who knows? But this is obviously just an analogy for poker. That's what you guys care about. Thirdly, versus aware players who are capable of adjusting well against us, we want to be balanced. It's much more important to be balanced against a regular who's smart than it is against some net who's just going to keep folding anyway, or some fish that just can't hit the fold button regardless of how value heavy we make our ranges. So that's degrees of adjustment. Like I just said, like, even when you do want to be balanced, when you do want to leave balance, you still want to think about how much balance do I need to retain. Pre-flop against the reg who folds too much, you still need to be balanced to some extent. You can't 3-bet your whole range. However, there are spots where you can just forget about balance entirely and just do whatever is best in a vacuum. Just do whatever is best, like at the extreme end of the spectrum of exploitivity, and those spots occur against fish, who you just want to be really exploitative against. For example, fish folds 70% to c-bets. Guess what? C-bet your whole range. It's going to be great. Or fish can just never fold. He has a win to show around of 42%. Don't ever bluff him, value bet, be extremely unbalanced. You don't need any balance there. So I hope this podcast has been useful. Let's just recap quickly what we've covered. GTO literally means playing in a way where you've hit Nash equilibrium and you're playing a strategy that cannot be improved. That's to say, if you make a change to your strategy, you'll be playing in an inferior way, theoretically, overall in the long run against your opponent who's playing the same strategy you are. What it means in a more practical sense for us, it means playing in a balanced way so that we're not offering our opponent routes to exploit us and make higher EV plays against us than we need to allow him to make. Why do we play GTO, or in a balanced way? Well, we do it so that we don't give our opponent a clear route to improving EV by exploiting us. And we do it because we might not have a way of playing a better exploitative strategy. We might not know, what our opponent's doing wrong yet, so we might not have a route to exploiting him without just risking killing ourselves for no real gain. When to be balanced? In common spots where we know that there are going to be opportunities for our opponent to see what we're doing and then adjust appropriately. And when we don't have better reasons to do unbalanced stuff, like our opponent is not obviously a fish, isn't like a net who's just always going to fold. So basically against aware players who we want to stay defensive against to begin with. And when we do adjust against regulars who are a bit unbalanced, we don't want to go full throttle, 3-bet any 2 cards, c-bet 100% of our range on a wet board, bluff 4 combos of bluffs for every 1 value. We don't want to do any of that, because although we might exploit our opponent a little bit in the short term, over the long run we're giving him a very clear route to just killing us. So the strategy actually becomes minus EV if we go too far with it. However, against fish, we can do that because they're probably not going to be aware, they're not going to adjust well, they're not going to know what to do. So that's what GTO is. It's not anything elusive or crazy. It's just basically trying to think of your range overall, trying to fill it with different types of combos so that it ends up being a balanced range and you choose the right hand for the right job, just like Plato would choose the right person for the right role in his utopia. I'll leave you with that thought. If you have any comments or questions, please get in touch. If you're on YouTube, you can see the information on your screen there of how to get in touch with me and what my website is at www.carrotcorner.com. If you're listening via iTunes, that's how you get me. My email is admin@carrotcorner.com. And I look forward to hearing from you guys, either because you want to hire me as a coach or because you just want to talk poker ideas with me or whatever, have any questions about coaching or whatnot. So see you in the next episode of Carrot Poker. It's been fun making this one, and I'll have another student on next time, no doubt, going over some more fun stuff for you guys. So I'll see you in the next one, and run good. Good luck at the tables. Bye for now.